Marcus Chen had seen death in 1,000 different forms across the galaxy. He had watched entire star systems burn under the relentless assault of the Vex-High Empire, witnessed friends dissolve into cosmic dust, and personally ended the lives of creatures that would haunt the nightmares of lesser beings. At 32, his body bore the scars of battles fought on 17 different worlds, each mark a testament to humanity's refusal to bow to alien oppression. The war against the Vex-High had lasted 8 brutal years. Marcus had enlisted at 18, fresh-faced and eager to serve humanity's cause among the stars. The Terran Defense Corps had molded him into something far beyond a mere soldier. He became a weapon, honed to perfection through pain, loss, and an unbreakable will to protect what remained of human civilization. The Vex-High were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, with exoskeletons that could deflect plasma rounds and minds that operated on pure logical brutality, they had conquered 43 species before setting their sights on Earth. Their philosophy was simple. Inferior species existed only to serve or be eliminated. Humanity, they declared, was particularly inferior. They were wrong. Marcus had been part of the legendary Titan Squad, an elite unit that specialized in impossible missions behind enemy lines. While other soldiers fought in the trenches of devastated worlds, the Titans struck at the heart of Vex-High operations. They sabotaged command centers, rescued prisoners from biomechanical torture facilities, and turned the tide of battles that military strategists had written off as hopeless. The final battle had taken place on Kepler 442b, a world the Vex-High had transformed into a massive weapons manufacturing facility. Marcus and his squad had infiltrated the planet's core processing center, fighting through hordes of Vex-High warriors and their enslaved alien auxiliaries. In the end, only Marcus had emerged from that hellish underground complex, carrying the detonation codes that would destroy the facility and cripple the Vex-High war machine. The explosion had been visible from orbit, a pillar of fire that reached into the planet's atmosphere and announced to the galaxy that humanity would never surrender. Within 6 months, the Vex-High Empire had collapsed, their remaining forces scattered to the far reaches of space. Marcus had returned to Earth as a hero, but heroes rarely found peace in civilian life. The government had offered him medals, promotions, and cushy positions in the newly formed Galactic Security Division. He had refused them all. After 8 years of war, he wanted only one thing: a normal life. Teaching seemed like the perfect escape. Children represented hope, the future that he and millions of others had fought to preserve. Marcus obtained his teaching credentials through an accelerated program designed for veterans, specializing in Earth history and galactic studies. The irony wasn't lost on him that he would be teaching about the very conflicts he had lived through. Lincoln High School sat in the suburbs of New Geneva, a sprawling complex of modern buildings that housed 3,000 students from grades 9 through 12. The principal, Dr. Sarah Martinez, had been eager to hire someone with Marcus's unique background. In an era where human children grew up knowing that monsters existed among the stars, having a real hero on staff seemed like excellent public relations. Marcus's first day had been surprisingly normal. The students were curious about his military service, but respectful. He had carefully edited stories about his experiences, focusing on the importance of courage, teamwork, and standing up for what was right. The kids ate it up, their eyes wide as he described distant worlds and the brave men and women who had died defending Earth. For 3 weeks, everything had gone smoothly. Marcus had begun to believe that civilian life might actually suit him. He developed lesson plans, graded papers, and even attended faculty meetings without feeling the urge to check for exit routes or potential weapons in the room. The nightmares still came, but they were becoming less frequent. Then he noticed Tommy Harrison. 15 years old, slight of build, with thick glasses and an obvious love for science fiction novels, Tommy was exactly the kind of kid Marcus had fought to protect. He was intelligent, asking insightful questions about the social implications of humanity's expansion into space. His essays were thoughtful and well-researched. He should have been thriving. Instead, Tommy was afraid. Marcus first noticed it during lunch period. He had been walking through the cafeteria when he spotted Tommy sitting alone at a corner table, hunched over his food as if trying to make himself invisible. 3 larger boys approached him, led by a hulking 17-year-old named Brad Morrison. Brad was the kind of kid who had peaked in middle school athletics and was desperately trying to maintain his status through intimidation. Marcus watched from across the room as Brad accidentally bumped into Tommy's table, sending his lunch tray crashing to the floor. The other students nearby either looked away or laughed. Tommy began cleaning up the mess without protest, his face burning with embarrassment. The teacher and Marcus wanted to intervene immediately, but something deeper held him back. He observed instead, cataloging the group dynamics with the same analytical skills that had kept him alive on alien battlefields. Brad Morrison was clearly the alpha, with 2 lieutenants who followed his lead without question. Tommy wasn't their only target. Marcus noticed several other students who seemed to actively avoid certain areas of the cafeteria. This wasn't random teenage cruelty. This was systematic oppression, as organized and deliberate as anything the Vex High had ever employed. Over the following days, Marcus paid closer attention to the social ecosystem of Lincoln High. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Brad Morrison and his crew had established a reign of terror that extended far beyond simple name-calling. They controlled territories within the school, collecting protection fees from younger students and using social media to humiliate anyone who crossed them. The administration seemed either oblivious or deliberately blind to what was happening. When Marcus raised his concerns with Dr. Martinez, she dismissed them as typical teenage behavior. "Boys will be boys, Mr. Chen," she had said with a patronizing smile. "A little roughhousing never hurt anyone. These kids need to learn to stand up for themselves." Marcus had stood in her office, feeling a familiar rage building in his chest. He had seen this attitude before, on worlds where local authorities collaborated with occupying forces rather than protect their own people. The details were different, but the fundamental betrayal was identical. Tommy's situation deteriorated rapidly. Marcus found him one morning with a split lip and bruised ribs, claiming he had fallen down the stairs. The next week, Tommy's backpack was found in a toilet, his homework and textbooks destroyed. When Marcus tried to file an incident report, the paperwork mysteriously disappeared from his mailbox. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. Marcus was staying after school to grade papers when he heard shouting from the parking lot. Looking out his classroom window, he saw Tommy surrounded by Brad Morrison and 4 other boys. They had cornered him between 2 parked cars, and Tommy was on the ground, curled up in a defensive position as kicks rained down on him. Marcus moved without conscious thought. One moment he was behind his desk, the next he was sprinting across the parking lot with a speed and grace that spoke to years of combat conditioning. The boys were so focused on their victim that they never saw him coming. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had commanded troops under fire. Brad Morrison straightened up, his face flushed with exertion and adrenaline. At 17, he stood 6 feet tall and weighed close to 200 pounds, most of it muscle from his football training. He was used to adults backing down when confronted with his size and attitude. "Mind your own business, Teach," Brad sneered. "This is between us and the little freak." Marcus took a step closer, and something in his posture made the other boys unconsciously step back. Years of warfare had taught him how to project menace without saying a word, how to communicate lethal intent through body language alone. "Tommy is my student. Marcus said calmly. "That makes this my business. All of you need to walk away, now." Brad laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "What are you gonna do, old man? Give us detention?" Marcus smiled, and it was the same expression he had worn while hunting Vex High commanders through the ruins of alien cities. "Try me?" For a moment, the parking lot was silent except for Tommy's labored breathing. Then Brad's natural cowardice asserted itself. Bullies, Marcus knew, were fundamentally the same across all species. They targeted the weak and scattered when faced with genuine strength. "Whatever," Brad muttered, gesturing to his friends. "This isn't over, Harrison." They walked away with forced casualness, but Marcus noticed how quickly they put distance between themselves and the parking lot. He knelt beside Tommy, helping the boy to his feet with gentle hands that had once strangled alien monsters. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked. Tommy nodded, though tears were streaming down his face. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. But you shouldn't have done that. It's just going to make things worse." Marcus studied the boy's face, seeing in it the same hopeless resignation he had witnessed in the eyes of conquered populations across the galaxy. It was the look of someone who had accepted that suffering was simply their lot in life, that resistance was futile. "Tommy," Marcus said quietly, "has anyone ever told you about the Battle of Rigel 7? The boy shook his head, confused by the apparent change of subject. "It was early in the war," Marcus continued, walking Tommy toward the school building. "The Vex High had occupied the planet for 6 months, and everyone said it was hopeless. The local resistance had been crushed, and the military command was ready to write off the entire system." Tommy listened intently, unconsciously straightening as they walked. "But there was one group of civilians who refused to give up," Marcus said. "A small band of farmers and shopkeepers who decided they'd rather die fighting than live on their knees. They had no military training, no advanced weapons, nothing but courage and the absolute refusal to accept defeat." They had reached the school entrance now, and Marcus turned to face Tommy directly. "Those farmers and shopkeepers held out for 3 weeks against an entire Vex High occupation force. Their resistance gave our fleet time to regroup and launch a counterattack. We retook Rigel 7, and those civilians became heroes of the war. Do you know why?" Tommy shook his head again. "Because they understood something fundamental about bullies, whether they're alien conquerors or high school students," Marcus said. "Bullies rely on their victims to stay victims. The moment you fight back, really fight back, everything changes." Tommy's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're going to help me fight them?" Marcus placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling over him like an old uniform. "Tommy," he said, "I've spent 8 years fighting monsters to protect kids like you. I'm not about to stop now just because the battlefield is a hallway instead of an alien world." As they walked into the school together, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since returning to Earth, a sense of purpose. The enemy was different, the stakes were smaller, but the fundamental mission remained the same. Protect the innocent, stand against oppression, never surrender. Brad Morrison and his crew had no idea what was coming for them. They were about to learn that some veterans never really leave the war behind, and that the most dangerous human is one with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The war for Lincoln High School was about to begin. Marcus spent that evening developing what he mentally classified as an operational plan. The same strategic thinking that had helped him map Vex High command structures now focused on the social hierarchy of Lincoln High School. He sketched organizational charts, identified key players, and analyzed patterns of behavior with the methodical precision of a military intelligence officer. Brad Morrison wasn't operating in a vacuum. Behind him stood a network of enablers, collaborators, and passive supporters that made his reign of terror possible. The football team provided muscle and social protection. Certain teachers turned blind eyes to obvious signs of bullying. The administration maintained plausible deniability while quietly benefiting from a student body too frightened to cause real trouble. It was, Marcus realized, exactly like the occupation hierarchies the Vex High had established on conquered worlds. Remove the head and the body would quickly fragment and collapse. But first, Tommy needed to be equipped for what was coming. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school early and found Tommy in the library, as he had every day for the past week. The boy had taken to eating breakfast there, arriving before the building officially opened and hiding among the stacks until first period. It was a survival strategy, but also a prison. "We need to talk," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from Tommy's table. Tommy looked up from his physics textbook, his face immediately clouding with anxiety. "If this is about yesterday, I'm okay. Really, you don't need to worry about me." "Tommy, how long has this been going on?" The boy's shoulders sagged. "Since freshman year. It started small, just name-calling and stuff. But Brad figured out I wouldn't fight back, and it just escalated." Marcus leaned forward. "Why haven't you told your parents?" "My dad travels for work, and my mom has enough problems. Besides, what would they do? Talk to the school? That just makes things worse. Trust me, I've seen it happen to other kids." Marcus nodded, recognizing the logic. In war zones, collaboration with occupying forces often seemed like the safest option for civilians trying to protect their families. It never worked in the long run. "What if I told you there was another way?" Marcus asked. Tommy's laugh was bitter. "Like what? Transfer schools? My parents can't afford private school, and everywhere else is just as bad." "No," Marcus said quietly. "Like fighting back." The book slipped from Tommy's hands. "I can't fight Brad Morrison. Have you seen him? He's twice my size." "Size means nothing if you know what you're doing," Marcus replied. "I once saw a 100-pound communications officer take down a Vex High warrior that outweighed her by 300 pounds. She knew where to hit and how to move." Tommy stared at him. "You want to teach me to fight?" "I want to teach you to survive. Fighting is just part of it. The real battle is up here." Marcus tapped his temple. "And in here," he placed a hand over his heart. "Warriors aren't born, Tommy. They're forged by necessity and shaped by choice." Over the next hour, Marcus outlined his plan. It wasn't about turning Tommy into a miniature soldier. It was about teaching him situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, and yes, basic self-defense. More importantly, it was about building confidence and showing him that he had allies. "Meet me in the old wrestling room after school," Marcus said as the warning bell rang. "And Tommy, this conversation stays between us." The boy nodded, and for the first time since Marcus had known him, Tommy stood a little straighter as he walked to class. The rest of the day unfolded with an almost surreal normalcy. Marcus taught his classes, discussing humanity's expansion into space and the cultural implications of first contact with alien species. His students were engaged and thoughtful, asking questions about terraforming technology and interstellar trade agreements. During lunch, he observed Brad Morrison's crew from across the cafeteria. They moved through the room like sharks, taking food from younger students, claiming tables, and generally asserting dominance through casual intimidation. Other students gave them wide berths, and Marcus noticed several teachers actively avoiding eye contact when incidents occurred. The parallels to occupied territories were so exact that Marcus felt a familiar cold anger settling into his bones. The same anger that had driven him through 8 years of war, that had sustained him through impossible odds and devastating losses. After school, Marcus waited in the old wrestling room, a dusty space that had been abandoned when the district built a new gymnasium. The mats were worn but serviceable, and the isolation made it perfect for what he had in mind. Tommy arrived 10 minutes late, clearly having taken a circuitous route to avoid potential encounters with Brad's crew. "Okay," Marcus said without preamble. "First lesson. What's the most important weapon a warrior carries?" Tommy looked around the empty room. "A gun? A knife?" "Wrong. Information. Everything else is just tools." Marcus began to pace, falling into the rhythm of instruction that had served him well during training exercises on distant worlds. "Tell me about Brad Morrison. Everything you know." For the next 20 minutes, Tommy provided a detailed briefing that would have impressed any intelligence analyst. Brad's schedule, his habits, his friends, his weaknesses, his family situation, his academic struggles. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Excellent," Marcus said when Tommy finished. "You've been conducting surveillance without realizing it. That's the foundation of everything we're going to do." Physical training came next. Marcus started with basic movements: how to fall safely, how to maintain balance, how to escape from various holds. Nothing fancy or dramatic, just practical techniques that could be learned quickly and remembered under stress. "The goal isn't to win fights," Marcus explained as he demonstrated a simple wrist escape. "The goal is to create opportunities, break contact, make noise, and get to safety. Violence should always be the last option." Tommy was a quick learner, his natural coordination serving him well. More importantly, Marcus could see confidence beginning to build with each successful technique. "Why are you doing this?" Tommy asked during a water break. "I mean, really, you could just report what you saw and let the administration handle it." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. How could he explain that watching a child suffer brought back memories of entire planets under siege? That the helplessness in Tommy's eyes was the same expression he'd seen in refugee camps across the galaxy? "Because someone has to," Marcus said finally. "Because ignoring evil doesn't make it go away, and because every battle matters, no matter how small it seems." They trained for another hour before Marcus called an end to the session. As they were cleaning up, Tommy hesitated at the door. "Mr. Chen, what if this doesn't work? What if I'm just not brave enough?" Marcus turned to face him directly. "Tommy, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling afraid and doing what's right anyway. You've been surviving Brad Morrison for 2 years. That takes more courage than you realize." The next morning brought the first test of Tommy's new training. Marcus watched from his classroom window as Tommy walked across the courtyard toward the main building. Brad Morrison and 2 of his friends intercepted him near the flagpole, the same location where they'd cornered him dozens of times before. But something was different. Instead of hunching his shoulders and trying to hurry past, Tommy stopped walking. He turned to face his tormentors, his posture straight and alert. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation from his position, but he could see the confusion on Brad's face. The confrontation lasted less than a minute. Brad made some gesture that was clearly meant to be intimidating, but Tommy didn't flinch. When Brad reached out to shove him, Tommy smoothly stepped to the side, using the movement Marcus had taught him to maintain distance while avoiding contact. Frustrated by his inability to provoke a reaction, Brad eventually stalked off with his friends, leaving Tommy standing alone by the flagpole. The boy looked up toward Marcus's window and gave a subtle nod before continuing to class. It was a small victory, but Marcus knew better than to celebrate prematurely. He had seen this pattern before in guerrilla conflicts. The first successful resistance operation often triggered escalation from the occupying force. Brad Morrison wouldn't simply accept this challenge to his authority. Marcus was right. The retaliation came 3 days later. Tommy's locker had been vandalized, his books torn apart and scattered down the hallway. Someone had spray-painted dead meat across his locker door in red letters. When Tommy reported the incident to the vice principal, he was told that while vandalism was unfortunate, there was no way to identify the perpetrators without witnesses. Marcus found Tommy in the library during lunch, staring at his destroyed textbooks with quiet fury. "This is my fault," Marcus said, sitting down beside him. "I should have anticipated this." "No," Tommy said firmly. "This is exactly what you said would happen. Brad's scared, so he's trying to scare me back." Marcus looked at the boy with new respect. "How do you feel?" "Angry," Tommy admitted. "Really angry, but not scared, not like before." "Good. Anger can be useful if you control it instead of letting it control you. What do you want to do about this?" Tommy was quiet for several minutes, thinking. "I want to hit back. Not physically," he added quickly. "But I want to show him that I'm not going to run anymore." Marcus smiled. "Then let's plan our next operation." What they planned was psychological warfare at its most elegant. Tommy would begin documenting every incident of bullying he witnessed, not just those directed at him. Photos, videos, timestamps, witness accounts. A comprehensive record of Brad Morrison's reign of terror. More importantly, Tommy would begin reaching out to other victims, building a network of allies, sharing information, creating a support system that had never existed before. "Bullies rely on isolation," Marcus explained. "They keep their victims separated and ashamed. Once people start talking to each other, comparing experiences, the whole system starts to break down." The strategy worked better than Marcus had dared hope. Within a week, Tommy had identified 6 other students who were regular targets of Brad's crew. More importantly, he'd found 3 upperclassmen who were tired of the toxic atmosphere, but had never known how to respond. Marcus provided tactical support while staying carefully in the background. He helped Tommy set up anonymous social media accounts, taught him basic digital security, and advised on legal methods of evidence gathering. When Tommy needed backup, Marcus was always nearby, but never obviously involved. The breakthrough came when Tommy convinced Sarah Chen, no relation to Marcus, a senior and student council member, to join their growing coalition. Sarah had social standing and administrative connections that Tommy lacked. More importantly, she had a younger brother who had been one of Brad's victims the previous year. Together, they began documenting patterns of harassment that extended far beyond physical intimidation. Cyberbullying, sexual harassment, theft, destruction of property, a systematic campaign of terror that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Marcus watched their progress with professional satisfaction. Tommy was displaying natural leadership abilities that reminded Marcus of some of the best officers he'd served under. The boy had learned to delegate responsibility, build consensus, and maintain operational security. Most importantly, he'd learned that strength came from unity, not isolation. But Brad Morrison wasn't finished. As his traditional power base began to erode, he became increasingly desperate and unpredictable. Marcus recognized the signs from his military experience. Cornered enemies were always the most dangerous. The escalation came on a Friday afternoon in November. Marcus was in his classroom, preparing for the weekend, when he heard shouting from the parking lot. Looking out his window, he saw a crowd of students gathered in a circle, the universal sign of a fight in progress. At the center of the circle, Brad Morrison had Tommy pinned against a car, his hands around the boy's throat. This wasn't playground bullying anymore. This was assault, potentially deadly assault. Marcus moved faster than he had since the final battle on Kepler 442b. He burst through the emergency exit, setting off alarms, and crossed the parking lot in seconds. The circle of students parted before him like water, sensing the lethal intent radiating from his every movement. "Let him go," Marcus said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death command decisions. Brad turned, his face flushed with rage and adrenaline. "This is none of your business, Chen. The little rat has been spreading lies about me." "The only thing he's been spreading is the truth," Marcus replied, continuing to advance. "Last warning, Morrison. Step away from my student." Brad laughed, but there was desperation in the sound. "What are you going to do? You can't touch me. You'll lose your job." Marcus smiled, and every student in that parking lot suddenly remembered that their mild-mannered history teacher was a decorated veteran of the most brutal war in human history. "You're right," Marcus said softly. "I can't touch you, but I can make sure that everything you've done over the past 3 years becomes public knowledge. I can ensure that your college applications include detailed accounts of your criminal behavior. I can guarantee that your parents learn exactly what kind of person they've raised." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Or you can let go of Tommy right now, walk away, and we can discuss a more civilized resolution to this situation." For a moment, the parking lot was silent, except for the sound of Tommy's labored breathing. Then Brad's survival instincts finally overcame his pride. He released Tommy and stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine," he said loudly, playing to his audience. "Keep your little pet, teacher, but this isn't over." As Brad stalked away, followed by his remaining supporters, Marcus knelt beside Tommy. The boy was shaken but uninjured, and there was something new in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, but determination. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked. Tommy nodded, getting slowly to his feet. "I'm tired of running," he said clearly, loud enough for the remaining students to hear. "I'm tired of being afraid, and I'm tired of watching other people get hurt." He looked around at the crowd of his peers, many of whom had been victims themselves at one point or another. "Brad Morrison is finished," Tommy continued, "but only if we stand together. Only if we refuse to let him divide us anymore." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched Tommy address the crowd. The frightened, isolated boy from 2 months ago was gone. In his place stood a young man who had learned the most important lesson of warfare, that courage was contagious, and that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept defeat. The real battle for Lincoln High School was just beginning, but Marcus knew they had already won the most important victory. They had transformed victims into warriors, fear into determination, and isolation into unity. Brad Morrison and his enablers had no idea what they were about to face, but Marcus did. He had seen it before on worlds across the galaxy, whenever oppressed people finally decided they'd had enough. The resistance had begun. The weekend following the parking lot confrontation marked a turning point that even Marcus hadn't anticipated. Tommy's public stand had created ripple effects throughout Lincoln High's social ecosystem, and by Monday morning, everything had changed. Word of the incident had spread through social media over the weekend, but not in the way Brad Morrison had hoped. Instead of portraying himself as the victim of teacher harassment, he found himself facing a coordinated information campaign that exposed 3 years of systematic abuse. Tommy and his growing coalition had spent Saturday and Sunday compiling their evidence into a comprehensive presentation that read like a military intelligence briefing. Photos of damaged property, screenshots of threatening messages, testimony from dozens of victims, and a timeline that showed clear patterns of escalation and predatory behavior. Marcus reviewed the document Sunday evening, marveling at its thoroughness and professional presentation. These kids had internalized lessons about documentation and evidence that many soldiers never learned. More importantly, they had maintained operational security throughout the process, keeping their activities hidden from potential informants. "This is impressive work," Marcus told Tommy during their Sunday evening training session. "But you understand what happens next, right? The administration is going to be forced to respond, and Brad's going to fight back with everything he has." Tommy nodded grimly. "Sarah says her dad knows lawyers who specialize in school harassment cases. If the administration tries to cover this up, we have options." Marcus felt another surge of pride. Tommy had learned to think strategically, to plan for multiple contingencies, and to build networks of support that extended beyond the school environment. These were advanced tactical concepts that many career soldiers struggled with. Monday morning arrived with an electric tension that every student could feel. Marcus positioned himself strategically in the hallway outside his classroom, where he could observe the main corridor without appearing to surveillance. He watched as Tommy walked to his locker, no longer alone but accompanied by 4 other students who had emerged as leaders of the resistance movement. Brad Morrison was nowhere to be seen. According to Tommy's intelligence network, he had arrived early and was holed up in the athletics wing, presumably planning his counterattack with his remaining allies. The first period passed without incident, but Marcus could feel the building pressure like an approaching storm. During his prep period, he received a call from the principal's office requesting his presence for an urgent meeting regarding recent developments. Dr. Martinez was not alone when Marcus arrived. Also present were the athletic director, the vice principal, and a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as the district's legal counsel. The setup reminded Marcus of military tribunals he'd witnessed on occupied worlds, where collaborationist authorities tried to maintain legitimacy while serving alien interests. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Martinez began without preamble, "we understand there was an incident in the parking lot Friday afternoon involving you and one of our students." Marcus settled into his chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who had testified before congressional committees about war crimes. "Yes, I prevented an assault in progress and de-escalated a potentially violent situation. I believe my actions were both necessary and appropriate." The legal counsel leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison's parents are quite concerned about what they perceive as threats made against their son. They're considering various legal options." "I see," Marcus replied calmly. "Are they also considering legal options regarding their son's documented history of harassment, assault, and intimidation against multiple students?" The room fell silent. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. The sudden realization that this wasn't a simple case of teacher overreach. "What documentation?" Dr. Martinez asked carefully. Marcus smiled. "The same documentation that will be presented to the school board at their meeting Wednesday evening. The same documentation that will be shared with local media if this matter isn't resolved appropriately." The athletic director, a man whose career depended on maintaining the football program's reputation, spoke for the first time. "Now wait just a minute. Brad Morrison is one of our star players. We can't just—" "You can't what?" Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet menace he'd perfected while interrogating Vex High prisoners. "Continue to enable criminal behavior because it benefits your sports program?" The legal counsel raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Let's not escalate this situation unnecessarily. I'm sure we can find a resolution that works for everyone." "The resolution is simple," Marcus replied. "Brad Morrison's reign of terror ends immediately. The victims receive appropriate support and counseling. The administration implements meaningful policies to prevent future incidents, and everyone involved faces appropriate consequences for their actions." Dr. Martinez's face flushed. "You can't dictate terms to this administration. We have procedures, protocols." "Your procedures and protocols have failed," Marcus said flatly. "Multiple students have been assaulted, harassed, and intimidated under your watch. Your failure to act has created legal liability that extends far beyond one problematic student." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was never in doubt. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of public embarrassment, the administration agreed to launch a formal investigation into Brad Morrison's behavior. More importantly, they agreed to implement the anti-bullying initiatives that Tommy's coalition had proposed. Mandatory reporting procedures, anonymous tip systems, and regular training for staff and students. Marcus left the meeting knowing that the war was essentially over. Bureaucracies, whether human or alien, always chose self-preservation when confronted with undeniable evidence of their failures. The final confrontation came that afternoon, in the same hallway where Marcus had first witnessed Brad Morrison's cruelty. But this time, the dynamic was completely reversed. Brad stood alone, his usual entourage having abandoned him as news of the investigation spread. He was still physically imposing, still potentially dangerous, but the aura of invincibility that had sustained his power was gone. Tommy approached him directly, no longer afraid, no longer hiding. Behind Tommy walked a dozen other students, former victims who had found strength in unity. "It's over, Brad," Tommy said simply. "The administration knows everything. Your parents know everything. In about an hour, everyone else will know everything too." Brad's face contorted with rage and desperation. "You think you've won something? You think this changes anything? I'll destroy you, Harrison. I'll make your life hell." Tommy didn't flinch, didn't back down, didn't show any of the fear that had once defined his existence at Lincoln High. "No," Tommy replied calmly. "You won't. Because you can't hurt someone who's not afraid of you anymore. And because you don't have any power here now." Marcus watched from the end of the hallway, ready to intervene if necessary, but confident that it wouldn't be required. This was Tommy's moment, the final test of everything they'd worked toward. Brad lunged forward, his fists raised, but found himself facing not a cowering victim, but a young man who had learned to move with purpose and confidence. Tommy sidestepped the clumsy attack, used Brad's own momentum to send him stumbling, and maintained perfect control throughout the encounter. When security arrived moments later, summoned by students with cell phones, they found Brad Morrison on the ground, cursing and threatening, while Tommy stood calmly nearby with witnesses who could testify to what had actually occurred. The aftermath unfolded with bureaucratic inevitability. Brad Morrison was expelled after a formal hearing where victim after victim testified about years of abuse. Criminal charges were filed for several incidents that crossed the line from bullying into assault. His college scholarship offers evaporated as news of his behavior became public. More importantly, Lincoln High School underwent a transformation that reached far beyond the removal of one problematic student. The anti-bullying program that Tommy's coalition had designed became a model that other districts began to adopt. Students learned that they had rights, resources, and allies when facing harassment. Tommy himself emerged as a genuine leader, elected to student council, and awarded a scholarship for his advocacy work. The frightened, isolated boy that Marcus had first encountered was gone forever, replaced by a confident young man who understood that strength came from standing up for others. On the last day of school, Marcus found himself cleaning out his classroom when Tommy knocked on his door. "Got a minute, Mr. Chen?" Marcus looked up from his boxes of files and lesson plans. "Always." "What's on your mind?" Tommy hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I wanted to show you something. College acceptance letters." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he flipped through the documents. MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and a dozen other prestigious schools, all offering Tommy full scholarships. "This is incredible," Marcus said. "You should be proud." "I am," Tommy replied. "But I wanted you to know that none of this would have happened without what you taught me. Not the self-defense stuff, though that was important. The other things. About courage, about standing up for what's right, about how ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, remembering another young man who had learned similar lessons on alien battlefields far from home. "You did all the hard work," Marcus said finally. "I just reminded you of what was already there." Tommy shook his head. "You did more than that. You showed me that heroes aren't people who aren't afraid. They're people who are afraid but do the right thing anyway." As Tommy left to join his friends for their graduation celebration, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from the battlefields of distant worlds to the hallways of a suburban high school. The war against the Vex High had been fought with plasma rifles and starships, but the principles remained the same. Protect the innocent. Stand against oppression. Never surrender. Whether the enemy was a 9-foot-tall alien warrior or a 17-year-old bully, the fundamental mission never changed. Marcus packed the last of his belongings, knowing that his teaching career at Lincoln High was complete. He had other battles to fight, other young people who needed to learn that courage was contagious and that even the smallest act of resistance could change everything. The Vex High Empire had learned that humanity would never bow to oppression. Now Brad Morrison and bullies like him across the galaxy would learn the same lesson. Some battles were fought among the stars, others in high school hallways, but the war for justice and dignity never ended. And humanity, in all its stubborn, courageous glory, would keep fighting as long as there were people worth protecting. Marcus Chen walked out of Lincoln High School for the last time, but his legacy would endure in the dozens of students who had learned that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept defeat. The warrior had found his peace, not in the absence of conflict, but in the knowledge that he had passed his strength to the next generation. The war continued, but now he had allies he had never expected to find in the most unlikely of battlefields.